My name is Marcus Thompson. I live in Iowa. 25 years. That's how long I'd been running from God, from this town, from the memory of my father's face the night he never came home. Pastor David Johnson didn't just disappear. He vanished like smoke, leaving behind a congregation in chaos, a family in ruins, and a son who stopped believing in miracles. I was 17 when Dad walked out of our kitchen after dinner, Bible tucked under his arm for evening service, and simply never returned. The police found his car by Miller's Creek, driver's door open, keys still in the ignition. No body, no note, no answers, but yesterday, everything changed. A construction crew demolishing the old church basement found something that made my blood run cold. Dad's leather Bible, wrapped in plastic, hidden behind a loose stone. Inside the front cover, in his careful handwriting, "If you're reading this, they silenced me. The truth is buried where we used to pray. DJ." Would you be brave enough to dig up the past? The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that felt like any other Tuesday, until it wasn't. "Marcus, this is Sheriff Williams. We need you to come down to Cedar Falls. We found something." I'd been living in Chicago for 15 years, building a life that had nothing to do with small-town Iowa or the God my father served. My apartment was a testament to secular success. Modern furniture, no crosses, no family photos from before. The disappearance. I'd constructed a perfect wall between Marcus Thompson, the marketing executive, and Marcus Johnson, the pastor's son, who once believed in answered prayers. The drive back to Cedar Falls felt like traveling through a time warp. Every mile marker was a memory I'd buried. The curve where Dad taught me to drive, the billboard advertising Henderson's Hardware where he'd buy supplies for church repairs, the water tower painted with Home of the Fighting Eagles where I'd carved my initials with Sarah Mitchell before everything fell apart. Cedar Falls hadn't changed much. Main Street still had the same brick buildings, the same American flags hanging from the same lampposts. But Calvary Baptist Church, Dad's church, was gone. In its place stood a pile of rubble and a construction sign, "Future Site of Cedar Falls Community Center." Sheriff Williams met me at the site. He'd aged 25 years in 25 years, his brown hair now silver, his face carrying the weight of too many unsolved cases. Dad's disappearance had haunted him too. "Marcus, I know this is hard," he said, holding out an evidence bag, "but we need you to identify this." Through the clear plastic I saw it, Dad's Bible. The leather was cracked but intact, the gold lettering on the cover still visible. Reverend David Johnson. My throat tightened. I hadn't seen that Bible since the night he disappeared. Where exactly did you find it? Behind a loose stone in the basement wall. Been there for decades, wrapped in plastic. Like someone was preserving it. Sheriff Williams paused. "Marcus, there's something else. Something written inside." He opened the evidence bag carefully, revealing Dad's handwriting on the inside cover. The ink was faded, but readable. "If you're reading this, they silenced me. The truth is buried where we used to pray." DJ. My hand shook as I read the words, "Where we used to pray." Every Sunday morning before the congregation arrived, Dad and I would kneel together at the altar, just the two of us. He'd pray for wisdom, for his sermon, for the people he served. I'd pray for stupid teenage things, good grades, for Sarah to notice me, for the Cubs to win the World Series. "Sheriff, I thought you searched everywhere back then." "We did. But we didn't tear down walls." He looked at the rubble around us. "Marcus, I need to ask you something. Do you remember your father acting strange in the weeks before he disappeared? Different somehow?" I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember. Dad had been quieter than usual, spending more time in his study, taking phone calls that he'd end abruptly when I walked into the room. I'd assumed it was regular church business, budget problems, member complaints, the usual drama that came with leading a small congregation, but that was just the beginning. There was something, I said slowly. About a month before he disappeared, he started locking his study door. He'd never done that before. And he was having meetings with the deacons more frequently. Late-night meetings. Sheriff Williams nodded grimly. We're going to need to expand this investigation. That basement hasn't been touched since the night. Your father disappeared. If there's evidence down there. As we stood among the ruins of my childhood church, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 25 years. A flicker of hope. Not hope for Dad's return. I wasn't naive enough to believe he was still alive. But hope for answers. Hope for closure. Hope for the truth that had been buried in silence for too long. My phone buzzed with a text from my boss. Thompson, where are you? Johnson Industries meeting in an hour. I looked at the message, then at the rubble, then at the evidence bag containing Dad's Bible. For 25 years, I'd been running from this place, from these people, from the questions that haunted every quiet moment. Not anymore. I typed back, family emergency, taking extended leave. What I found next left me breathless. The basement excavation began at dawn. Sheriff Williams had secured the area with yellow tape, but half the town had gathered to watch. Cedar Falls was the kind of place where a police investigation was bigger news than the Super Bowl. I stood at the edge of the pit, watching two officers carefully remove debris with brushes and small tools, treating the site like an archaeological dig. 25 years of dust and neglect had settled over everything, but the basement walls were intact, along with the foundation stones that had supported the old sanctuary. Marcus! I turned to see Sarah Mitchell, now Sarah Henderson, married to Tommy Henderson from the hardware store family, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. She looked exactly like her mother now, the same kind eyes and gentle smile that had once made my teenage heart race. I heard you were back in town, she said, handing me the coffee. I'm so sorry about all of this. Thanks, Sarah, I appreciate it. She stood beside me, both of us watching the excavation. You know, I always wondered what really happened to your dad. He was such a good man, always helping people, always there when families needed him. Did he ever seem trouble to you in those last few weeks? Sarah frowned, considering. Actually, yes, I remember, because my grandmother was sick, and Pastor Johnson came to visit her every day. But those last couple of weeks, he seemed scared. That's not like him at all. Before I could respond, one of the officers called out, "Sheriff, we found something." We rushed to the edge of the pit. The officer was kneeling beside what looked like a metal box, partially buried beneath a fallen stone. It was about the size of a shoebox, rusted but intact. "Careful now," Sheriff Williams called down. "Document everything before you move it." The process felt like it took forever. Photos from every angle, measurements, careful extraction, with tools that looked like they belonged in a surgeon's kit. Finally, the box was lifted from its hiding place and carried to a folding table set up nearby. Sheriff Williams opened it slowly, revealing a collection of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be audio cassette tapes. Everything was sealed, in plastic bags protected from moisture and decay. "Marcus, I need you to look at this." The sheriff held up a photograph, black and white, grainy, but clear enough to see 2 men in an intense conversation. One was my father. The other was Deacon Harold Pritchard, the church treasurer. "When was this taken?" I asked. "Look at the date stamp." Sheriff Williams pointed to the bottom corner. March 15th, 1999, 3 weeks before Dad disappeared. In the photo, Dad was holding what looked like a ledger book, pointing to something on the pages. Deacon Pritchard's face was turned away from the camera, but his body language suggested he was upset, possibly angry. "There's more," the sheriff said, pulling out a small tape recorder. 3 cassettes, all labeled with dates, from March 1999. My heart was pounding. Dad had been investigating something serious enough to hide evidence, serious enough to prepare for the possibility that he might be silenced. "Can we listen to them? We'll need to get them to the state lab first. Make sure they're still playable. But, Marcus," Sheriff Williams lowered his voice, I want you to prepare yourself. If your father was investigating fraud or embezzlement, if he discovered something that threatened people's reputations or livelihoods, you think someone in the church killed him? It wasn't a question. The pieces were falling into place like a horrible puzzle. The secret meetings, the locked study door, the fear Sarah had noticed in Dad's behavior. He'd been investigating his own deacons, his own congregation. Sheriff Williams. We turned to see Deacon Pritchard himself walking toward us, flanked by 2 other elderly men I recognized as church board members. Harold Pritchard was in his 70s now, but he still carried himself with the same authority he'd had when I was young. He'd been the one to deliver Dad's eulogy, the one who'd held the church together after the disappearance. What's all this? Commotion about? Pritchard demanded, his eyes fixed on the evidence table. I heard you were digging up the old church basement. We found some items that may be related to Pastor Johnson's disappearance, Sheriff Williams replied carefully. We'll be conducting interviews with anyone who was close to the case. Pritchard's gaze shifted to me, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear? Anger? Guilt? Marcus, he said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone I remembered from childhood. I know this is painful, but dredging up the past won't bring your father back. Some mysteries are meant to stay buried. I couldn't believe what I saw in his eyes, the way he looked at that evidence table, the way his hands trembled slightly when he saw the photograph of himself with Dad. Harold Pritchard knew exactly what was in that box, and he was terrified. We'd found it, Mr. Pritchard, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I think it's time the truth came out. Don't you? He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. But I noticed he made a phone call as soon as he thought he was out of earshot. That evening, I sat in my old bedroom at Mom's house. She'd moved to Florida years ago, but kept the house for sentimental reasons, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling when I was 12. Dad had helped me arrange them in actual constellations, teaching me about Orion and the Big Dipper and how ancient sailors used the stars to find their way home. My phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Heavy breathing. Then a voice I didn't recognize. Stop digging, Marcus. Some stones are better left unturned. The line went dead. I looked out my bedroom window at the house across the street, the Pritchard house, where a light was still burning in the upstairs window despite the late hour. He dropped his guard for just a moment, and what I saw changed everything. Sunday morning in Cedar Falls felt like stepping into a time machine. The bells of First Methodist were ringing, families were walking to church in their best clothes, and the smell of pancakes and bacon drifted from kitchen windows. Everything was exactly as I remembered, except for the gaping hole where Calvary Baptist used to stand. I'd made a decision the night before after the threatening phone call. I was going to attend church, not at Calvary, obviously, but at First Methodist, where many of Dad's former congregation had relocated after his disappearance. If someone wanted me to stop digging, then I was definitely digging in the right place. The Methodist church was packed. I slipped into a back pew, hoping to go unnoticed, but in a town of 2,400 people, the pastor's prodigal son returning after 25 years was front-page news. Marcus Johnson. I turned to see Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald, my third-grade Sunday school teacher, making her way down the aisle toward me. She was 83 now, but still sharp as a tack, and twice as determined. Mrs. Fitzgerald, I stood to greet her. "It's good to see you." "Oh, honey," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like lavender and mothballs. "I heard about what they found at the old church. Your father was a good man, Marcus, a good man who asked too many questions." Before I could respond, she lowered her voice. "You be careful, dear. Some people in this town have long memories and short tempers." The service began before I could ask what she meant, but her words echoed in my mind throughout the hymns and prayers. Mrs. Fitzgerald had been at Calvary for 40 years before Dad disappeared. If anyone knew what he'd been investigating, it would be her. After the service, I waited by the parking lot, watching the congregation file out. I noticed something interesting. The old Calvary family seemed to cluster together, avoiding eye contact with the Methodist regulars. 25 years later, the division was still there. Marcus. I turned to see Deacon Robert Hayes approaching. He'd been one of Dad's closest friends, the one who'd organized the search parties when Dad first disappeared. But now, looking at his nervous expression, I wondered if their friendship had been as genuine as I'd believed. "Robert," I said carefully, "how are you?" "I'm well, Marcus. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about this investigation. I know you're looking for answers, but..." He glanced around nervously. "Some things are better left alone." That's the second time someone's told me that this week. Because it's true. His voice rose. Then he caught himself and lowered it again. "Your father was a complicated man, Marcus. He wasn't the saint you remember." "What's that supposed to mean?" Robert looked around again, then leaned closer. "There were rumors, Marcus, about the church finances, about your father's personal conduct." My blood ran cold. "What kind of rumors?" "I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but there was talk about missing money, about inappropriate relationships. The board was going to confront him about it, but then he disappeared." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "You're lying." "I'm trying to protect his memory, Marcus, and yours. Let the dead rest." But something in his eyes told me he was the one lying. The way he couldn't maintain eye contact, the way his hands shook when he mentioned the missing money. Robert Hayes was scared. And people don't get scared about 25-year-old rumors unless those rumors are about to become facts. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where Dad's memorial stone stood. It was a simple granite marker. Rev. David Johnson, 1955-1999, beloved father and shepherd. No body to bury, just a stone to mark the space where his life should have continued. Was kneeling beside the marker when I heard footsteps behind me. "I thought I might find you here." I turned to see Mrs. Fitzgerald approaching with a small bouquet of flowers. She placed them beside the stone, then sat on the ground beside me with a grunt. "These old bones don't move like they used to," she said. "Marcus, I've been thinking about what you're going through, and I think it's time you knew the truth." "What truth?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a small key. "Your father gave me this about a week before he disappeared, told me to keep it safe, that someday you might need it." The key was small, brass, with a number etched into it, 247. "It's for a safety deposit box at First National Bank," she said. "He made me promise to give it to you if anything ever happened to him." My hands were shaking as I took the key. "Mrs. Fitzgerald, what was Dad investigating?" "The building fund," she said quietly. "We'd raised nearly $200,000 to build the new fellowship hall. Your father discovered that the money was being diverted. Stolen, Marcus, by people he trusted. The deacons? Some of them. Harold Pritchard was the treasurer, but he wasn't working. Alone." She stood up slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Your father was going to expose them that Sunday morning. He had all the evidence, all the proof he needed. But he disappeared Saturday night?" "Yes, he did." Mrs. Fitzgerald's voice was grim. "And 3 days later, Harold Pritchard announced that there had been a accounting error, and the building fund was gone. Lost in some kind of investment scheme, the pieces were falling into place. Dad hadn't just stumbled onto embezzlement. He'd been methodically building a case against his own church leadership. The secret meetings, the locked study, the hidden evidence. He'd been preparing for war." "Mrs. Fitzgerald, why didn't you tell the police about the key?" She looked at me with sad eyes. "Because I was scared, Marcus. Because your father wasn't the only one who knew about the money. Because some secrets in this town run deeper than you know." As I drove to the bank, the key burning in my pocket, I thought about the phone call from the night before. "Stop digging, Marcus," but I was just getting started. The safety deposit box contained documents that would change everything, but I had no idea that opening it would put my life in danger. What I found inside made my blood run cold. First National Bank of Cedar, Falls looked exactly the same as it had when I was a child: marble floors, brass fixtures, and the same portrait of the bank's founder hanging behind the teller counter. But my hand shook as I approached the customer service desk with Mrs. Fitzgerald's key. "I need to access a safety deposit box," I told the woman behind the counter. She looked at the key, then at my ID, then frowned. "Sir, this box has been inactive for over 20 years. I'll need to check with the manager." 20 minutes later, I was seated in a small windowless room with the safety deposit box in front of me. Box 247. The metal container was larger than I'd expected, about the size of a shoebox, and surprisingly heavy. Inside, I found my father's real investigation. The first item was a manila folder labeled Calvary Baptist Building Fund Evidence. Inside were bank statements, photocopied checks, and a handwritten ledger in Dad's careful script. The numbers told a story of systematic theft spanning 3 years. $200,000 raised by the congregation, $50,000 deposited, $150,000 diverted to personal accounts. But the names on those personal accounts made me sick. Harold Pritchard, the treasurer; Robert Hayes, the head deacon; Tom Henderson, the contractor who was supposed to build the fellowship hall; even Dr. Mitchell, Sarah's father, who'd been the church board chairman. Dad had documented everything: check numbers, dates, amounts. He'd even managed to get photographs of the men meeting at Pritchard's house, counting cash and signing documents. The second folder was labeled Insurance Policies. Inside were life insurance documents, policies on Dad's life, taken out just months before his disappearance. The beneficiary wasn't my mother or me. It was the church building fund, with Harold Pritchard as the trustee. They'd insured my father's life for $300,000, enough to cover the missing money and leave a tidy profit. My hands were shaking as I opened the third folder, Correspondence. This contained letters, photocopied and dated, between Dad and someone at the state attorney general's office. He'd been building a case for prosecution, working with investigators to build a federal embezzlement case. The final letter was dated March 30th, 1999, 3 days before Dad disappeared. "Revers Johnson, we have reviewed the evidence you provided and are prepared to move forward with arrests. Please maintain your current surveillance and do not confront the suspects directly. We will contact you within the week to coordinate the operation. Special Agent Patricia Reynolds." Dad had been 3 days away from bringing down the entire conspiracy when he vanished. But it was the last item in the box that nearly stopped my heart: a small tape recorder, identical to the one we'd found in the church basement, with a note taped to it in Dad's handwriting: "Final recording, March 31st, 1999. If something happens." To me, this is the proof. I put on the headphones and pressed play. My father's voice filled my ears, 25 years younger, but heavy with exhaustion and fear. "This is David Johnson. It's 11:30 p.m., March 31st, 1999. I'm recording this in my study because I believe my life is in danger. Harold Pritchard called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. He says it's about the building fund, but I think they know I've been investigating them. I've discovered that the theft is worse than I originally thought. They've been stealing from the church for 3 years, but it's not just our church. They've been running the same scam with at least 2 other congregations in the county. Tom Henderson builds the buildings for below market rates, then splits the excess with the church leadership. The insurance policies are the backup plan if anyone gets too close to the truth. They have accidents. I've hidden copies of all the evidence in 3 locations: one at the church, one at the bank, and one somewhere else that only Marcus will understand. If they kill me, if they make me disappear, I need him to know that I never stopped fighting for what was right. Marcus, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this. I'm sorry I couldn't just walk away and let them steal from God's people. But I couldn't let them destroy the church your great-grandfather built. I couldn't let them—" The recording cut off abruptly. In the background, I could hear a car door slamming, footsteps on the porch, urgent knocking. They'd come for him that night. I sat in the bank's small room surrounded by the evidence of my father's murder and felt 25 years of anger. And grief crystallized into something harder: determination. Dad had been 3 days away from justice when they silenced him. But his evidence was still here, still viable, still enough to bring them down. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We know you were at the bank. Walk away now," or "Join your father." I looked at the message, then at the evidence spread across the table, then at the door of the small room. Someone had been watching me. Someone knew exactly what I'd found. I quickly photographed every document, every page, every piece of evidence. Then I called Sheriff Williams. "Sheriff, I need to see you immediately, and I need you to bring backup." "Marcus, what's wrong?" "I found Dad's real evidence, all of it, and I know who killed him." There was a long pause. "Marcus, where are you?" "First National Bank." "And Sheriff, I just got a death threat. They know I'm here. Stay put. I'm on my way." As I waited for the sheriff, I looked through the evidence one more time. Dad had been meticulous, careful, thorough. He'd built an airtight case against the people he'd trusted most. People who'd eaten at our dinner table, who'd been to my birthday parties, who'd prayed with us every Sunday morning. People who'd killed him for $150,000 and a life insurance payout. But there was one more thing. In Dad's final note, he'd mentioned 3 hiding places: the church, the bank, and somewhere else that only Marcus will understand. I closed my eyes and thought about the places that mattered to us both. The altar where we'd prayed together, the cemetery where we'd visited my grandmother's grave, the creek where he'd taught me to fish, and then I remembered our special place, the old oak tree behind the church where Dad would take me when I was troubled or scared, where he'd carved our initials when I was 8 years old, where he'd told me that no matter what happened, God would always be there to guide me home. If there was a third cache of evidence, it would be there. But as I prepared to leave the bank, I realized I was being followed. A black sedan had been parked across the Woolwa Street when I arrived, and it was still there. Through the tinted windows, I could see the outline of at least 2 men. 25 years after my father's murder, they were still watching, still waiting, still willing to kill to protect their secret. He dropped the bag, and what was inside changed everything. The final confrontation was coming, but I had no idea how deep this conspiracy really went, or how many people in Cedar Falls were willing to kill to keep the truth buried. I left the bank through the back exit, clutching the copies of Dad's evidence in a manila envelope. The black sedan was still parked on Main Street, but I managed to slip out through the alley behind the building. My rental car was parked 2 blocks away, and I made it there without being spotted. The old oak tree was exactly where I remembered it, standing like a sentinel behind the ruins of Calvary Baptist. 25 years had made it larger, its branches now reaching almost to the ground. I parked at the edge of the cemetery and walked the rest of the way, using the headstones as cover. The tree was massive, its trunk easily 6 feet in diameter. I circled it slowly, looking for any sign of disturbance, any indication that Dad had hidden something here. Then I saw them, our initials, carved into the bark when I was 8 years old. DJ plus MJ, surrounded by a lopsided heart, but now there was something else. Below our initials, almost hidden by the bark's natural growth, was a small metal plate. I scraped away the accumulated moss and dirt, revealing a keypad lock. My father had installed an electronic lock on our tree. I stared at the keypad, trying to think, what number would Dad have used? My birthday? His birthday? The date the church was founded? Then I remembered the date on his final recording, March 31st, 1999. 03/31/99. I entered the numbers. Nothing. I tried it different ways. 3/31/99. 331/999. Still nothing. Wait. Dad always wrote dates the old-fashioned way, 31/03/99. I entered 310309. Click, a small panel swung open, revealing a waterproof container. Inside was another folder, thicker than the ones at the bank, and a video camera, an old handheld model from the 1990s. The folder contained photographs that made my blood run cold. Pictures of the men burying something in the woods, pictures of them loading a wrapped object into a boat, pictures of them cleaning blood from the floor of the church basement, and pictures of my father, tied to a chair, very much alive but terrified. They hadn't killed him quickly. They'd held him somewhere, probably trying to get him to reveal where. He'd hidden the evidence. The final photograph showed Dad, still alive, but barely conscious, being loaded into the trunk of a car. The video camera contained one final recording. I found a bench in the cemetery and watched my father's last message. "Marcus, if you're seeing this, then you found all 3 hiding spots. I'm proud of you, son. I always knew you were stronger than you believed." I'm recording this on April 2nd, 1999. They've been holding me for 3 days now, but I think they're getting desperate. Harold keeps asking about the evidence, but I haven't told them anything. I won't let them destroy what we built. The truth is worse than I thought, Marcus. This isn't just about our church. They've been running this scam for over a decade, stealing from churches across 3 counties. The insurance fraud, the embezzlement, the money laundering, it's all connected. Tom Henderson is the ringleader, but he's got connections in the sheriff's department, in the county government, even in the state attorney general's office. I think they're going to kill me tonight. They're getting sloppy, making mistakes, but I want you to know that I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid because I know you'll find this someday. I know you'll make them pay. There's one more thing, son. I'm sorry I never told you how proud I am of you. I'm sorry I was so focused on the church that I forgot to tell you every day how much I love you. But I need you to know that everything I did for you, for your future, for the church that will someday be yours to lead. Be strong, Marcus. Be brave. And remember, God sees everything, even when justice seems impossible. He's already working to make things right. I love you, son. Take care of your mother, and don't let them win. The video ended with the sound of car doors slamming, footsteps, and my father's voice calling out, "Marcus, remember the stars. Follow the stars." Home. I sat in the cemetery, surrounded by my father's evidence, and wept. Not just for his death, but for the 25 years I'd spent running from his memory, from his faith, from the truth he died to protect. But my grief was interrupted by the sound of engines. 3 cars were approaching the cemetery, the EI black sedan from the bank, plus 2 pickup trucks. They'd found me. I grabbed the evidence and ran toward the tree line, but they were faster. Harold Pritchard stepped out of the lead car, flanked by Tom Henderson and 2 men I didn't recognize. They were all armed. "Marcus," Pritchard called out, "that's far enough." I stopped running. There was nowhere to go. "You should have listened to us," Pritchard said as they approached. "Should have left well enough alone." "Like my father should have?" "Your father was a fool," Tom Henderson spat. "A self-righteous fool who couldn't mind his own business. He was protecting his congregation from thieves. He was protecting his own reputation." Pritchard's voice rose. "Do you know what your precious father was really like? Marcus, do you know about the gambling debts, the affairs, the money he stole from the mission fund?" "You're lying, am I?" Henderson pulled out a manila folder. "We've got pictures, Marcus. Pictures of your father with other women, receipts from the casino, check stubs showing him stealing from the church he claimed to love." I looked at the folder, then at the men surrounding me. "Even if that were true, it doesn't justify murder." "Murder?" Pritchard laughed. "Your father isn't dead, Marcus. He's in South America somewhere, living off the money he stole from us. The whole disappearance was staged, but I could see the lie in his eyes, and I had something they didn't know about." "Really?" I said, pulling out my phone. "Then explain this." I played the audio from Dad's final recording. My father's voice filled the cemetery, describing his captivity, naming his captors, explaining the conspiracy. The men's faces went white. "That's impossible," Henderson whispered. "We destroyed all the recordings." "You destroyed the copies you knew about," I said. "But Dad was smarter than you gave him credit for." Pritchard raised his gun. "Give me that phone, Marcus, and the evidence. Even if you kill me, it won't matter. I've already sent copies to the FBI, to the state attorney general, to the local news stations. It's over, Harold." It was a bluff, but a good one. Pritchard hesitated, looking at the other men uncertainly. And that's when I heard the sirens. Sheriff Williams arrived with 3 patrol cars and what looked like federal agents. They surrounded the cemetery, cutting off all escape routes. Harold. "Pritchard! Tom Henderson! You're under arrest for the murder of David Johnson." The final confrontation was swift and brutal. Henderson tried to run and was tackled by 2 deputies. Pritchard dropped his gun and raised his hands, but he was still defiant. "You can't prove anything," he said, as they handcuffed him. "That evidence is 25 years old." "The statute of limitations doesn't apply to murder," Sheriff Williams said grimly. "And we found the body, Harold. Miller's Creek dried up during the drought last month. Your victim was right where you left him." As they loaded the men into patrol cars, Sheriff Williams approached me. "Marcus, I owe you an apology. I should have pushed harder 25 years ago. I should have asked more questions." "You couldn't have known. I suspected." "That's the hell of it. I suspected. But I didn't want to believe that people I'd known my whole life were capable of murder." I watched the cars drive away, carrying my father's killers to justice. The evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the documents, the photographs. It was enough to put them away for life. But there was still one more revelation coming, and just when I thought it was over, I discovered the truth about why they really killed my father. The trial began 6 months later in the county courthouse where I'd once attended citizenship ceremonies with my father. The media attention was unprecedented for Cedar Falls. CNN, Fox News, even international outlets covering the pastor's murder mystery that had captivated the nation. I sat in the front row every day, watching as the evidence Dad had died to protect finally saw the light of day. The prosecution was led by Special Agent Patricia Reynolds, the same FBI agent Dad had been working with 25 years ago. She was older now, gray-haired and battle-worn, but her determination to get justice for my father had never wavered. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said in her opening statement, "this case is about more than murder. It's about a conspiracy of greed that destroyed a good man who refused to be silenced." The evidence was overwhelming. Dad's recordings played in the courtroom, his voice describing the conspiracy, naming his killers, detailing the evidence he'd gathered. The photographs from the tree cache showed the defendants burying evidence, cleaning up crime scenes, counting stolen money. But it was the forensic evidence that sealed their fate. Miller's Creek had indeed dried up during the previous summer's drought, revealing what remained of my father's body. 25 years in the water had destroyed most of the soft tissue, but the bones told a story. Fractured skull, broken ribs, evidence of prolonged torture. Dad had suffered before he died. The DNA evidence was conclusive. Hair fibers found in Tom Henderson's truck matched my father's DNA. Blood traces found in the church basement, traces that had been painted over but not completely eliminated, also matched. Harold Pritchard broke first. On the 3rd day of testimony, faced with the mountain of evidence and the possibility of the death penalty, he agreed to cooperate in exchange for life without parole. "We never meant for it to go that far," he testified, his voice barely audible. "It started small, just borrowing from the building fund during cash flow problems. We always intended to pay it back." "But you didn't pay it back," Agent Reynolds pressed. "You kept stealing." Tom convinced us it was victimless. The insurance would cover any losses. The churches would get their buildings eventually. No one was supposed to get hurt. Except Pastor Johnson discovered what you were doing. Pritchard's hands shook as he nodded. He had everything. Bank records, photographs, recordings of our meetings. He was going to destroy us all. "So you decided to destroy him first?" Tom said we had to make him disappear, Said it was the only way to protect our families, our reputations. We tried to reason with him first, tried to make him see that going to the authorities would hurt the whole community. But he refused to be silenced. He said he'd rather die than let us steal from God's people. Pritchard looked directly at me for the first time. Marcus, I'm sorry. Your father was a good man, better than any of us deserved. The confession was devastating. Pritchard detailed how they'd lured Dad to an emergency meeting at the church, how they'd held him in Tom Henderson's barn for 3 days, torturing him to try to get him to reveal where he'd hidden the evidence. He never told us, Pritchard admitted, even when Tom got rough with him. He just kept saying that the truth would come out eventually, that God would make sure justice was served. Tom Henderson's trial was separate and more contentious. Unlike Pritchard, he showed no remorse, no willingness to accept responsibility. I'm a businessman, he testified in his own defense. I built churches, provided jobs, contributed to the community. David Johnson was going to destroy all of that over a bookkeeping dispute. A bookkeeping dispute? Agent Reynolds' voice was incredulous. You stole over $400,000 from multiple churches. You murdered a man who tried to stop you. I defended myself and my business from a man who was trying to frame me. But the jury saw through his lies. The evidence was too strong, too detailed, too carefully documented by my father's meticulous investigation. The verdict came after only 4 hours of deliberation. Harold Pritchard, guilty on all counts, life without parole. Tom Henderson, guilty on all counts, death penalty. Robert Hayes, guilty of conspiracy and embezzlement, 25 years. Dr. Mitchell, guilty of conspiracy, 15 years. As I watched them being led away in shackles, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 25 years. Peace, not happiness. The pain of losing Dad would never fully heal, but peace in knowing that justice had finally been served. The civil settlements came later. The insurance companies paid out millions to the affected churches. The stolen money was recovered from various accounts and investments. The community began the long process of healing, but there was one more revelation that changed everything. I thought I knew about my father's final days. Agent Reynolds approached me after the sentencing. Marcus, there's something I need to show you, something we found in Tom Henderson's house during the search. She handed me a small cassette tape. This was hidden in his wall safe. It's a recording of your father's final hours. I stared at the tape, not sure I wanted to hear it. He was brave, Marcus, braver than I've ever seen. Even at the end, he was still fighting for what was right. I took the tape home and played it alone in my father's old study. His voice was weak, strained from the torture, but unbroken. You can kill me, but you can't kill the truth. My son will find the evidence. The FBI will investigate. God will judge you for what you've done. Henderson's voice responded, Your God isn't coming to save you, preacher. And my father's final words, recorded moments before they killed him, he already has. He gave me a son who won't let you get away with this. Tell me in the comments, would you have had the strength to continue your father's fight? The truth had been buried for 25 years, but it had finally come to light. Justice had been served. But more importantly, I had discovered something about faith, about legacy, about the power of truth to survive even death itself. My father's work was finally complete. 1 year after the trial, I stood in the same cemetery where I'd found Dad's final evidence. But this time, I wasn't alone. The entire community of Cedar Falls had gathered for the dedication of the new memorial, not just a stone marker, but a proper monument honoring Pastor David Johnson and his sacrifice for truth and justice. Sarah Henderson, she'd divorced Tom. After his conviction, stood beside me with her 2 teenage children. Mrs. Fitzgerald, now 84, sat in a wheelchair in the front row, tears streaming down her face. Sheriff Williams was there, along with Agent Reynolds and dozens of people whose lives had been touched by my father's ministry. But the most important person there was my mother. Mom had flown in from Florida for the dedication. She was 73. Now her hair silver white, but her eyes still held the same strength that had carried her through 25 years of not knowing what happened to her husband. "He would be so proud of you," she whispered as the crowd gathered around the memorial. The new pastor of the rebuilt Calvary Baptist Church that used the recovered stolen money to construct a beautiful new sanctuary stepped forward to deliver the dedication prayer. "Lord," he began, "we gather today to honor a man who chose truth over comfort, justice over safety, faith over fear." David Johnson's sacrifice reminds us that some principles are worth dying for, and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find a way to the surface. As he spoke, I found myself remembering Dad's words from that final recording, "Follow the stars home." It had taken me 25 years to understand what he meant. The stars weren't in the sky, they were the points of truth, the evidence he'd scattered like constellations across our small town, waiting for someone to connect them and find their way to justice. After the ceremony, I walked alone to the rebuilt church. The sanctuary was beautiful, soaring ceilings, stained glass windows depicting scenes of faith and redemption, and at the front, a simple wooden cross that somehow seemed to capture all the hope and pain of the past quarter century. I sat in the front pew, the one where Dad and I used to sit during services, and for the first time in 25 years, I prayed, not the desperate, angry prayers of my youth, demanding to know why God had let such terrible things happen, but a prayer of gratitude. Gratitude for a father who'd chosen to do what was right, even when it cost him everything. Gratitude for the strength to continue his fight. Gratitude for the truth that had finally set us all free. I wondered if I'd find you here. I turned to see Agent Reynolds standing in the doorway. She'd become a friend over the past year, helping me navigate the legal complexities and media attention that had followed the trial. "How are you holding up?" she asked, sitting beside me. "Better than I expected. It's strange, I spent so many years angry at God, angry at this place, angry at the people who let Dad down. But now you understand what he was really fighting for." I nodded. He wasn't just trying to catch some thieves. He was trying to protect the idea that faith should mean something, that when people trust you with their money, their children, their souls, you don't betray that trust. He succeeded. You know, the new financial oversight laws, the mandatory background checks for church leadership, the federal task force on religious fraud, that's all because of your father's investigation. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, surrounded by the colored light streaming through the stained glass windows. "What will you do now?" she asked. I'd been thinking about that question for months. My old life in Chicago seemed like it belonged to someone else. The marketing job, the sterile apartment, the carefully constructed wall between my present and my past, none of it felt real anymore. "I'm moving back to Cedar Falls," I said. "The church board asked me to serve as interim administrator while they search for additional staff, and I'm thinking about seminary." Agent Reynolds smiled. "Following in your father's footsteps?" "In some ways, but I think I want to work with law enforcement too. Help other families who are dealing with corruption, with cover-ups, with the kind of institutional betrayal we experienced." As the sun set over Cedar Falls, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I felt something I hadn't experienced since I was 17 years old. Hope. Not just for myself, but for the future. For the possibility that good could triumph over evil, that truth could overcome lies, that faith could be restored even after the deepest betrayal. I took communion that Sunday for the first time in 25 years. As the grape juice touched my lips and the bread dissolved on my tongue, I felt Dad's presence as clearly as if he were sitting beside me in the pew. The pastor's words echoed in the sanctuary. "Take and eat in remembrance of him." But I was remembering more than Christ's sacrifice. I was remembering my father's sacrifice, my mother's strength, my community's capacity for healing and redemption. I was remembering what it meant to have faith as I walked out of the church. That morning, Mrs. Fitzgerald took my arm. "Your father's work isn't finished, you know," she said with a twinkle in her eye. "There are other churches, other communities, other people who need someone to fight for the truth." I looked back at the church, at the memorial, in the cemetery, at the town that had raised me and broken me and ultimately redeemed me. "I know," I said, "and I'm ready." The sun was shining through the clouds, casting everything in a golden light. For the first time in 25 years, the world seemed full of possibility. Maybe God never left. Maybe he was just waiting for me to stop running and start looking for the truth. Maybe he was waiting for me to come home.